All right. Hey, guys. This is the second time I will be doing this introduction today, since AshCon streamed the first one on a different channel. So, welcome to Cake. We're going to be talking about market research today and redoing one of our earlier cakes that we did before. As always, Cake is a donation-based weekly workshop that we hold every Wednesday. So feel free to donate online. You guys over there, again, feel free to toss money to us in there. The topic of today's cake is one that's come up a lot over the last year that we've been running these. Just kind of like works its way in. So a lot of this might be kind of pieced together review, but hopefully we have a more concise description of all of it that we get to present in archive here today. So market research is really necessary. And we started figuring this out towards the turn of the century, and really like as psychology started influencing business a little bit more, and especially then around the 50s. We started getting really into market research. In the 60s is really kind of like the golden age of when we kind of transitioned from just sort of like feeling things out and doing things because they thought they were right, and actually doing kind of psychological analyses and breaking our markets into segments and things like that. And it used to be, though, that market research was something that really big businesses would do, and that's just because that's where the trend comes. You know, you kind of have cutting-edge technology or tactics to improve your business that get developed, and they hit the people who have enough money that they can kind of risk their money on these new techniques to see what happens. And it turns out market research is just a really valuable, good one to use. But back then, and still, I mean, people spend just thousands of dollars on market research, up to, you know, hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars trying to figure out who their market is and testing them. And, of course, this is Cake, so our advice to you is to not spend millions of dollars on market research and run a lot of small tests. And this is also just back when the internet didn't exist, and we didn't really have enough technology to make our market research go really fast and to do low-cost surveys that, you know, took place across the United States, and now we can really do that. Even something like paying for a Facebook ad, you can target those down to... I was listening to a business interview with someone who... he did chef-related products, and he targeted his Facebook ad down enough that he just had like three really big chefs who ran restaurants, and those were the only people who this ad was targeting, which he knew just because like of how segmented he had made it. It's like, this ad targets 3 people, and he's just like, by going into their profiles, he's like, oh, it's these 3, great. Like, you can get really specific down to figure out what people will click on, and it's so much easier and cheaper than before. And also, just back in the day, projects themselves took way more money. You know, in order to launch a product or launch a service or launch a business, a lot of it involved either, having a manufacturing plant that you could hammer down, or having a manufacturing plant that you could kind of sublease to do smaller projects. And either way, you had to pay for the molds, and you had to do, like, even publishing a book up until very recently was really insane. And now with the cheaper cost of launching products, it also means that a lot of our market research can be done just by launching things and seeing how they go, and launching really small before we build into our big brand, which is part of the overall kind of Cake philosophy of launching fast and dirty and seeing what happens, rather than spending a lot of time planning things out and writing a business proposal or a business plan and going from there. It's just so cheap to get things going now. Why not start that way and do your market research by actually physically getting something in front of someone? And another thing that happened as a result of early kind of experiments with market research, which is great back in the day, and just like having market research in general and saying, oh, this group of people buys differently than this group of people and spends their money on different things, was already just this huge insight. And then more modern theory has found that having people say what they'll spend money on, or having people say what they'll do, is actually really inaccurate. Human beings in general are just really bad at predicting our own future actions, as you can tell by like the rate of gym memberships and actual gym attendance. So getting people down to that point where they actually are pulling out their wallet to spend money on something, or actively take some kind of investment, I think we're fine, in what you're doing, is also much more accurate. Like, not only more sane, I think, and more doable nowadays, but just much more accurate way to get a sense of what people are going to invest in with your business. So then you run into a little like chicken and the egg problem, though, with market validation when you come at it from that perspective. So like, if what you want to do is really have your product in front of someone and have them buying it in order to test to see whether it's good, you first have to have a product, but then you don't have a product because you don't have the money to spend because you haven't done the market research to figure out how you get the people to come in and buy your product. So a lot of this talk really is just on breaking that down and figuring out how you get past that back and forth problem and just kind of break into it really low cost. So the first thing that I want to do is just talk about a few different strategies that you have at your disposal for doing really cheap market research. So the first one I wanted to mention is selling someone else's product, which is the idea of you're going into a field and there are probably already people in that field, or at the very least people doing something similar. And if not, then one of these other tactics will work much better for you. But even going into something as niche as float tanks, when we first got in, the way that we tested the market was by going around and floating everywhere in the Northwest. And then we found a guy who was running floats out of his apartment who was really cool, who we clicked with, who later became one of our business partners, Christopher. And we just asked him if we could give people like a $5 discount to go float at his place and see if we could, sell it to our friends / people who we met at parties. And just that in the process of both online, getting a mailing list going, trying to sell floats or let people know they could go float it in this guy's apartment for $5 off, / going to parties and just talking to people about float tanks and being like, hey, if you want, I can get you $5 off of a float. Actually ended up working. And the people who we met at parties who were these random people actually went and followed up on it and went and floated. And people who we collected their email addresses and emailed about it actually went and tried out the tank. And it was a really good way to just be like, oh, I guess we actually do know how to talk about this. And it was like a nice validation that we actually could encourage people to get into a float tank. And regardless of whether it works at first, it's a really nice way to just, over time, perfect your marketing techniques until you do find something that clicks in and latches on. And in the meantime, the investment that you're risking is zero. You're selling someone else's product and setup, and they've already done all the time and money invested in everything else that goes along with it. All you're doing is kind of working out your own marketing while you go along and establishing who your customers are, hopefully collecting some data on them. And we'll get more into that in a little bit, along with collecting data, or along the lines of collecting data on people, just because a lot of what we say in Cake 2 is we have the scientific method, so why not use it? And it's really easy to use too, especially in regards to market research. So another good one is first, making just one copy of a thing. So you have an idea for whatever it is that your product's going to do, and then try to simplify it down, as far as you possibly can, because a lot of what people are going to use to buy your product is that first impression, is that just initial landing page that they end up at, or the ad in a paper, not so much anymore, that you see, or whatever it is, a recommendation from a friend who's just telling you about how cool something is. And Kickstarter is really good at this. They launch a lot of their things with little beta testing images, or an idea that someone has fleshed out a little bit and says, hey, we can do this, give us some money and it'll come into reality. But you can really do that ahead of time as well. Timothy Ferriss did that really well, and I've talked about this a few times, but it's just the most concise explanation of how to figure out how you're going to sell something before you ever have a product that exists that I've found out there, which is he just knew he wanted to write a book about business efficiency, which ended up being the 4-Hour Workweek. And from there, he tested a bunch of different title headlines just as Google ads, and had the same little catchphrase below them. And 4-Hour Workweek was actually one of his less preferred business titles. He thought it was really silly. But it just got by far the most clicks on Google Ads. And so he knew that people, just by looking at different kind of array of titles would want to choose that one the most. And then he took that title and he had a bunch of covers for a book mocked up. And then he just went into a bookstore and sat down in a chair and slipped one of the book covers that he had made up for the books over another book and set it out on a shelf. And then just kept a little tally mark of how often people picked up certain book covers that he had put down. And so he chose the book cover that people wanted to pick up the most. And then he did the same thing and moved it on to table of contents, and then did landing pages / more in-shop testing with that, and figure out what table of contents, what are the topics people actually want to find out about. And then he just wrote the first chapter and sent off all of his data to a publisher, along with a sample first chapter, and was here's how I arrived at what I did. People want this book, which is great. And overall expense very low to begin with, but you already have a fully fledged product almost by the end of it. And the important thing too, I think, with this is actually getting people to, click on that ad like they thought they were going to an actual site to buy this book, or like pick up the book in a store like they thought it was an actual book that existed that they wanted to buy. Like he's really good at getting that, the decisions that he's forcing really close to actual action that people would take in the real world with his product, which is really important. Another good one is the idea of, I call it a taste tester in this, but basically so eventually you want your product, and you probably want it automated, or a service, and you want it to appeal to a bunch of people and apply to a bunch of people, and you want it to basically just be sold all around, which means eventually you have to have an actual company, and you have to have all these automated things that happen, especially in the software world. And a good example of this, the reason I call it a taste tester, is an example from one of the business books that I'm really fond of, the Lean Startup, where he talks about how shopping, like a basically shopping arranger company started up, which was they wanted to give shopping lists along with meals that could be cooked to families. And just be like, hey, like we will deliver groceries to you and like get along with recipes and tell you just what you can cook up with these that are really healthy, which sounds really cool. And you could just kind of like log on online and see your taste preferences and things like that and what kind of food you prefer, and it would just automatically give you food and recipes to cook. But to test it out and to make sure that they could get that automation right, like ideally the program is doing most of the heavy lifting here. And so what they did is they independently just chose one person and started like catering to them. Like rather than have the program automate all of those things, they just went in and personally went shopping with the person. We're like, hey, what kind of food do you like? And like then they went shopping by themselves, but came back and were like, hey, did we pick out things that you like or things that you don't like? And then they had a chef come in and actually cook them food with the different meals and be like, hey, did this come out to your liking? Do you like how this ended up? And all that costs is your time, obviously, as the business founder. That's invested in like spending that much time with one person, but also just the cost of catering to one person, which is really low, and you collect so much useful feedback from that. I was recently listening to an interview with a guy who followed this model, which is now becoming really popular both in online and kind of more brick and mortar physical services. He was saying, he did about 100 of these personal interviews and talking to people and kind of catering to them for his product that he was designing. And he said after about 5, the amount of useful data that he got really like declined incredibly. Like after about 5 people, he had a pretty good idea of what was going on. So it doesn't take a tremendous amount of these. Like in typical science, you want a really big in value or really big sample size to make sure, get into the p-value is less than 0.05 and stuff like that, which just means there's a low probability it was due to chance. It gets into crazy statistics things. But in the real world, like, as far as just figuring out whether an idea is good, whether it's worth pursuing, like 5 just sample customers will give you a really good idea. And he said above 50 was really worthless, like above 50, and it was just all stuff that he'd known before. So somewhere between 5 and 50 is kind of that magic number probably that you'll hit where you're like, okay, I feel like I actually have a really good grasp on this situation. And that's a good time to pause too and say what the end result or like the end goal of all of this is, which, like everything with cake, the end goal is to test things really fast, not so that you can figure out how to do them right necessarily, but so you can figure out whether they're even a good idea, like whether they're worth doing or whether you should just ditch them and move on to something else. Because there are lots of good ideas out there that just are not actual viable businesses, or you can't get people excited about, or you can, but will take way more energy than they're worth. Which isn't to say that like passion projects and things like fighting uphill battle aren't worth it, but you'll at least know that it's going to be an uphill battle rather than something that's going to come really easily from your few conversations with people. And that's good information to go into it with. And I'd also advise you to just really not be afraid of like tossing out the really good ideas that you have, because there are easier ones out there, and there are like a lot of passions that people have. And if all you have is one good idea and one thing that you're interested in, then my advice is to like expand your life a little bit rather than try and make that one idea work and fit it into like the mesh of reality. And this works too with pretty much everything. There's so you can think of it for really small things like doing floats and how we did it. You can think of it with that kind of like cooking example. But this is even done with really big companies, like people who are doing crazy MRI scanning machines and really big medical equipment that require a huge upfront investment. And what they do is they go and rather than like go in with a sample or try to like build a custom MRI machine for a hospital or something, they just go in there and say, hey, what's working? What's going on with your current MRI machines? What would you like them to do? Like, if I could build this for you, would you buy it from me? And if not, like, why not? What could I add that would make you buy it? And you kind of end up, like, once again, after about 5 conversations with this giant spec sheet for an MRI machine that you know that if you can actually design this thing, people will buy it. So just as a little example, it works on a kind of more expensive big scale just as much as it works on a t-shirt manufacturing, like, simple small scale. The next one, just the idea, and this is, we'll expand on this one too a little bit as we go further into the talk, but the idea of just running really simple A/B testing, which the idea, for if you guys don't know about it, A/B testing, the basic idea is if you're doing one of something, especially on a website, it's really easy to serve up 2 versions of that website, or even in physical reality. If you're putting up a sign to showcase something like a piece of retail, why not put up one sign one day and another sign the next day, and just see how your sales are affected by that. And really, as long as you're doing one thing, like, it's not that much work to change one line, or to change a few words, or to change a color that's in the background, or the size of something. And so you might as well just run tests all the time, and that's what we'll get into. But running tests now is also easier than ever, especially with things that can track click-through rates. Like, the amount of online analytics that we have out there is just incredible. And there's lots of free services too. We often recommend just Craigslist testing for testing headlines. Google Ads, like Timothy Ferris did, is also a really good way. Taking out cheap Google Ads and just like showcasing a couple highlines that you think, or headlines that you think highlight what it is you're trying to get across or the market you're trying to hit. You can find out really quickly by just tracking clicks which one of those gets the highest audience. And there are little quick counters for Craigslist that you can get, and that's free. So just launching some free Craigslist ads for something like, hey, I'm doing freelance web design, like da-da-da, as the top headline, and then the next week you launch another one, and the next week you launch another one, and just pay attention to clicks, and then like go with the one of those 3 that got the most clicks, and then start changing other things and A/B testing. There's no reason that everyone shouldn't be doing A/B testing. It's so simple nowadays, and Float-On is also really guilty of that. It's really hard once you get in the midst of things, and once things just have to come up really fast, and once you're already dealing with clients, and once you already have a business running, to kind of ignore the testing side of things. And it's something you just have to constantly remind yourself is really worth doing. And really small changes too can boost those like click-throughs and boost your revenue by like 300%, especially early on. And if you're wondering, is there something that specifically I should be A/B testing, or certain types of things I should be adding in there? Yes, there are. You can find entire lists of them, of really big kind of best practices for A/B testing that just go through the top 20, like the top 50 things that you can like tweak that other people through A/B testing have found really increase their sales. And that's kind of the low-hanging fruit that you want to pick. And if you just look that up online, I won't even give you a resource. Just Google like things to A/B test, and you'll come up with a tremendous amount of lists. And so that's another thing, once again, for getting your market. And you might find that things that you thought would appeal to one market, like if you're going for a certain income class, for example, and really appealing to a luxury type of person, but it turns out the headlines that you're using on Craigslist are really pulling in more clicks from like a headline that says like affordable. That's a really good sign that maybe your luxury version of this is not going to sell nearly as well as if you manage to cut some corners on it and lower the price and go for like more mass, but kind of a lower income demographic. Other places that you can try these, eBay is a good one too, putting things up on eBay and testing them out there. Just because that is actually an auction place, which means you can really closely track amount of money that comes in from it. If you're not familiar with eBay too, just keep in mind it is going to take a few months to get good at that. And kind of the same goes for Craigslist and other things too. Like if what you're getting across the board when you launch a series of Craigslist ads is 0 clicks on all of them, probably means you just need to spend some time working on your ad copy in general and your Craigslist dynamics and figuring out what's going on there. And same with eBay. If everything that you're launching is selling really low, like there's a lot of books out there and a lot of just online blogs about how to increase your eBay sales. Etsy is another good one that you can test things out on. Shopify is another one for physical products where you can launch them really easily and quickly and just like kind of beta test different products that you're launching and see how well they sell. Insta, like actual physical shops, just like Timothy Ferris did, which I'm pretty sure is not actually smiled upon by shops, but going in and like putting your merchandise there and seeing who picks it up is definitely a way to do it, kind of on the sly. But also just getting your goods carried in really small local shops around too, even if all you have is like 10 of them. and eventually you want to go into mass production. Like just hand making tin and getting them carried in a small shop for like short time can tell you a lot about how they'll eventually do in that shop. And then another one is to refine as you sell, which kind of goes back to that idea of the big MRI machine manufacturer, which really is going along and trying to sell your product. And as you're doing that, like if you just go in with any idea, you're like, I want to design like some kind of crazy poultry catapult that like shoots these things like fried chickens across a festival, like to the other side, because I think that would go really well and be this like really weird booth that does well at festivals, you know. It's like, well, you can tell really easily by like going to a festival and pitching like fried chicken trebuchet and to the owners of the festival, whether they're going to even go for it or not, and whether people are excited about it. Like, and you know, you can tell just by talking to people like who would buy your fried chickens. Like, hey, if you saw a fried chicken just flying through the air over like the width of this festival grounds, and then you got to eat it later, would that be something you paid for? You know? And if they're like, no, and it's like, well, why not? It's like, well, you know, I always pictured chickens kind of a little more floaty. Like maybe if you created some canal system that the chicken could float down, that's what I'd go for. You'll find out a lot as you go along. So if you were to take something away from kind of these 5, and there's a lot more ways to do this too, but those are 5 main ones that I found for actually getting your market testing out there really quickly and easily. To take away is just, once again, that market testing really doesn't take even a lot of time or money. Like, how long does it take to mock up 10 different Craigslist headlines and then launch Craigslist ads? You don't even need bodies to the ad, like, or text inside. All you need is a counter, because for now you're not even worried about creating content for the inside. You just want to know if people are willing to click on that headline. It takes almost no time, and certainly no money, because Craigslist is free. So the idea that we need to do really much more advanced tactics, especially when we're just starting out, I think is a huge fallacy, and I think is going the route of, you know, like there's this idea that money that we take, like money that we're going to spend, just expands to fill up however much money we currently have. And I think that's where you end up with a lot of the really huge, overabundant market researching things that are going on now. And also in big business, if there's another reason to stay away from big spending and market research or a lot of really early stage planning, they have really deep pockets, which means if there's a failure, they want something to point their finger at. And as a small business, like, you don't need to worry about that bullshit. Like a lot of market testing, a lot of early research, a lot of stuff is so that like the people who are planning this thing don't get fired. If something goes wrong, they can say, well, the market research said it was supposed to go right. Like all indications were that this would be a success. And that will save their job. Like, you're not in the market of saving your job. You're in the market of creating one. So if there's another reason to go with some of these earlier, rougher tests as opposed to the big ones, it's just like the liability part doesn't matter. So you can skip all the bullshit. Okay. The second part of this thing. I'm trying to combine 2 talks into one, so hopefully we don't go too long on this. But the second part is really focusing in on that idea of a scientific method. And that's especially relevant for when you get into Craigslist testing, when you get into doing headline testing, things like that, where you're actually doing different variables and going about it. And I think a lot of people forget what the root of the scientific method is, and I certainly had, I guess, going into this. You know, I was like a who, what, where, when, why kind of thing. And I think being falsifiable really is the key to the scientific method. Like coming up with a hypothesis that is actually falsifiable, that can go wrong. And that's really all you need. Like if you just come up with a test and think like, hey, if I take these 2 t-shirt designs down to Saturday Market and show one for half the time and one for the other half of the time, I think that this one will sell better. Like that's it. That can be your hypothesis, because you can take them down to Saturday Market and one of them will sell better and one of them will not. And that can prove it wrong. Making that guess ahead of time, I think, is really important. And it's important for a few reasons. It's important because it really makes you figure out what you're doing ahead of time and what you want to test. And then it also makes you guess. And being proven wrong or right does a lot for our internal feedback mechanisms. Like if we never actually, like if all we say is, I'm going to just take these down and see which one sells better. Human beings do this weird backwards rationalization thing. Like it's likely that we will come away from that Saturday Market with a t-shirt design that sold better, thinking that from the beginning we thought that one was going to sell better, regardless of which one we actually thought beforehand. Just because that's how we work. We're crazy human beings, and we always backwards rationalize. So going in ahead of time, knowing which one you think is going to sell better is great. If you want to get even more sciencey with it, you can make your own personal guess and then send someone else to Saturday Market. Because there's also this idea of priming and this idea of experimenter bias. So if you go in thinking that one's going to sell better, you're actually going to like start doing things to make that one sell better as well, which is really silly. Because what you want is just objective feedback, but it's not going to help you. So there's ways. It's called a blind study, by the way. If you sent an employee in who didn't know which one was supposed to sell better, but regardless, there's a lot of things out there that can actually help you about doing scientific tests on things. So we're going to talk about that first. So the first step to the scientific method and to scientific method with market research especially too is observation. Like you need something to base your hypothesis on. And that's where just sitting in similar stores comes from, or having conversations with people who are running similar businesses, or in our case with Float On, like the first bit of market research we did was just going out to float at all the places we could in the Northwest. And it's as simple as that. Like if you're in the business of designing like, whatever crazy sales software, you probably want to go and sample the sales software that's already out there and just observe what they're doing. And more than that, you probably just want to call businesses around town and find out what they're using, or businesses in your industry, and then find out what they really like and what their problems are. Like observation and conversation is going to be the root of a lot of your advance in this and a lot of your development early on. And it costs nothing. Again, like people are so happy to talk about themselves and their businesses that they've started up, especially if you hit below a certain threshold. Like if this business is not making millions a year, they're going to be flattered that you even thought to like call them as a leader in their industry and talk to them. I certainly am. Like I'm always happy to give 5 minutes to someone who just has a few questions. And then question. What else do you want to know? What sort of things do you expect to be based off of what you're finding out with your experiment? As you're digging into it and as you're having conversations with people, they're going to mention things that you never thought about. Like it turns out you thought you were solving one problem, but the actual problem is that just the pages on their web app load too slow. And really speed ends up being the issue because they have someone behind the counter who's waiting for this sale to ring up. And if you could just solve that speed thing, like that would be great. And what you thought you were doing was organizing buttons on a screen so that like the person behind the register could cash out faster. Which would completely overhaul the entire idea of what you're focusing on with your crazy retail web app. You know what I mean? So question. As you go along with your observations, definitely continue to ask questions. Don't think that just because you had a good idea beforehand, that good idea is going to be what you end up with afterwards. Hypothesize. Based on these observations and based on what's going on, what do you think is a good route to your business? What do you think is... here's a good way of saying it. What do you think is an early action that people would take that indicate that they're willing to take a more substantial action once you actually launch? And let's use the Saturday Market t-shirt example again, because that's a really solid one. So hypothesize that if you go down to Saturday Market and talk about how eco-friendly your shirts are, how they're actually manufactured in the US, not made by slave labor, how all of the designs are done by local artists, your prediction is that that will sell better than just putting up a generic t-shirt without any of that information, and that's it, you just run with it. To do that, you actually don't need to get local artists to design t-shirts and make all of your different things. All you need to do is like go to the bins and grab 2 t-shirts and hang them up like that you think have good designs and hang them up on a rack. And when people go to buy them, just say, oh, sorry, we're sold out of that thing. Like it doesn't even have to have a physical product there. But it will prove your hypothesis. Like if you just go half the day with touting the eco-friendliness of this shirt, you can even use the exact same shirt, like buy 1 shirt at the bins and save yourself 12 cents or whatever it is. And then you take away the sign and see if people are willing to pay the same money for the shirt or come up to you and approach you as much. Like you had a hypothesis, and that's very testable and tells you exactly what you wanted to know of if this would create some kind of influence. Once again, that's just Saturday Market. So really, like you should add on to your hypothesis at Saturday Market. But you can do that with anything too. Test online, test with Craigslist, Facebook, Google Ads. And the main thing here, again, is make something falsifiable, like saying, I think customers will be willing to give me their email address for this thing. Is not actually a falsifiable experiment if you put up a landing page, because you probably will get at least a few email addresses. Like saying, I think within a 72-hour period, if I do these things, that I will collect over 100 email addresses, is more falsifiable. Like the more specific you can get with what you want to test, the better. And it's kind of weird, it's kind of scary when you start doing that and you're like, well, I don't know if it'll be 100 people. And that's kind of the point. Like just putting anything down, like you're not chained to it. It's not like you're wrong and there's some weird like hypothesis police out there that are going to come down and bust you for doing too many inaccurate hypotheses. Like, it does help you have a little reality check, though, and when you actually sell 3 or get 3 people to sign up for your mailing list instead of those 100, you're like, oh, maybe I should reevaluate my idea. Like, maybe I can't actually do these amazing things that I think I'll be able to. And then on the other side too, if you suddenly get 500 people signing up for your mailing list within 72 hours, you're like, okay, like probably this is a good idea then. Maybe I should run with this one. And then testing, just figuring out how you're actually going to run the tests and where you're going to run them. And a good way to do this is just don't try to choose the platform based on some arbitrary means. Figure out what your hypothesis is for, I think so.
October, you got it.
For where your customers spend their time. Are you trying to hit people who are going to be shopping in a physical shopping center? Are you trying to hit people who spend most of their time online? Are you trying to hit Luddites who like wooden shoes and will never go near technology? Like, all of these things will affect how you actually do your market research and your testing. Same thing, like, is it a social product? Is it a work product? What are you actually trying to establish here? And then how are you going to match your methods to what you want to figure out? So a good research project has 2 groups at least. It has an experiment and a control. And the control just means whatever would have been happening before you decided to run your experiment, essentially. And an experimental group is something where you're actually sort of testing something out. So for instance, if you have a just web page already that's been out there for 2 years, and it pulls in like 1 reference a month or 1 reference a week or whatever it is, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to try and change the headline on this thing. Your control group is everything that has happened before with the website. It's that 1 customer per month coming in. That's your control, and you have the data for that. Your experiment is, I'm going to change it and see what happens now. And just so this sounds obvious somehow, but like, when you get into business, instead of actually, like, I think we're just conditioned so much from school and from different things to treat the lab like where experiments are done rather than just real life. And it's like almost counterintuitive. Like, we go to test something in business, and like my mind still goes to just wanting to do one thing and seeing if it works. And really, like, that's just so flawed. Like, you need something to control against. You need a baseline to be able to compare against. And for a business, a lot of times, you're not going to be able to start up 2 simultaneous businesses, especially with brick and mortar. With websites, you're allowed a little more luxury of being able to actually launch 2 websites at totally separate domains and see how each one does. So in that case, you can. Like when we started up Float On, the way we got our baseline was by not giving any deals or discounts or packages or memberships or anything for about 3 months. I think it might have even been 6 months that we ended up going, just to see how people naturally wanted to come in and spend their money and whether they'd come back naturally and what we needed to encourage, whether they'd bring their friends and just sort of what activities they weren't doing. And what we found with that was that a lot of people were coming in and just saying they really loved it. They were going to come back all the time. They thought it was great. And then they weren't coming back. They just disappear forever. And so we started doing more programs that actually encouraged return customers. And a lot of people were bringing friends in. A lot of people were coming in with other people and just saying, like, you need to try out this floating thing. It's so good. So what we didn't end up doing is a lot of really hard-hitting customer referral programs, or trying to get people to bring in their friends, or giving them a lot of rewards for that. And we tried doing that, and people just weren't using it because their friends were coming in naturally. But we found that out, and like as a result, we probably saved a lot of money and actually made a lot of customers really happy by figuring out what they actually needed and what they actually wanted well before we launched it. And if it had turned out that people were just automatically coming back and automatically referring friends and still coming and just like shopping at our shop on a regular basis, I mean, what's then the point of launching memberships or launching anything else? Like, we would have just been able to charge a flat rate for floats and never have to give discounts for anything because we didn't need to encourage any action. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind too. So that's the power of the baseline, however you establish it, whether it's by doing 2 different things simultaneously or just doing nothing for a little bit and then launching into your experiment. But yeah, that control group is something that weirdly gets overlooked, but I think it's really important for testing. And once again, since this is cake and not actually a lab too, it's important to remember these tests don't need to be really official. Like, they don't need to be foolproof. You don't need to control for everything. You don't need to actually make this a rigorous experiment that could be peer-reviewed in a journal and be tested. All you need to do is make sure that you're getting useful data to you out of it, that it's meaningful to what you want to accomplish. And a lot of early business, like just even going a little bit more towards the scientific method, a little bit more towards testing, will already be such an improvement over just trying to do things based on your gut instinct or something that you think is right. That when you do it, I mean, your gut instinct then starts kicking in. Like the more tests that you do, the more actual data you have to back things up. And the way human beings learn is just by processing all of that data and realizing what trends are. And human beings are association, pattern detecting machines. So the more you give yourself a chance to be proven wrong, and the more you run just really small, ugly tests, and the more you just, get your stuff out there, the more internally you're also just making better decisions, and the more you know what to test. And somehow in the process, you just get to know your customers really well. And so that's the cake method for doing market research, really, is a lot of small tests, small, cheap, and dirty, and actually find out what people want. A lot of conversations, too. And that's pretty much it. The last step then is just analyzing it. You've collected all of this data, you've been recording it somewhere, and then you just go back and look it over. And my guess is the analyzing step is actually going to be really quick. For most of the tests that we've run, we haven't needed to sit in front of a spreadsheet and actually go through all of the hardcore statistics. It's as simple as we've been monitoring our sales over the last couple months. Now we launched a new program and we see how our sales are doing over those few days, and that's it. It took 5 minutes of just running a little sales report. At the end of your Saturday market test, maybe it's just you probably already know, by the end of sitting at Saturday market, you probably know which one is more popular. The analyzation, as intimidating as that sounds, takes almost no time. And so that's it. Market research through really fast and dirty methods and through science. And just a review of the methods that I recommended before too, to kind of get your brain turning as you wind down the session, is sell someone else's, making none of something, pretending almost like it exists and trying to get the person as close to pulling out their credit card as possible. Selling to a single person, getting one person to be your test case, and then refining your product from there until they're totally stoked with it, and then move on to another single person. Serving up words, just even the step before that, making none of a product, just only serve up headlines and see what gets people excited about things. Work on your marketing before you work on your product and see what that gets you. And then refining as you sell, just a lot of initial conversations with people and finding out what they actually want from something, and going to them with a really early stage version and find out if that's actually what they want. Because once again, you should not trust people just based on what they say. That and another just entreaty to use the scientific method as often and as simply as possible. And I think with that, we'll go towards a little break and come back for the workshop section after this. So thanks for tuning in, guys. And once again, we're totally donation-based, so feel free to donate online. We have a little donate button there, or toss a little money into our cake lockbox here live at the East Bank Saloon. All right, thanks very much, guys.